الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله تعالى فإن الله تعالى مع المتقين وبعد. There are three areas upon which we have or we potentially have influence when it comes to raising the next generation, raising our children. And this is a topic that we've spoken about previously. And it's a very important topic, if not the most important topic that we can discuss as a community. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا. Protect yourselves and your families from the punishment that awaits those who perverse from His path in this life. And it's very important to understand what it means to raise a child, to nurture a child, to teach a child. And we often point fingers, and we point fingers towards the schooling system or the schools, the governments, the society, regardless where we are, regardless whether we're here or we're abroad, whatever the case may be. And we like to point out the problems we have within the schooling systems, within the governmental approach to child raising and so on and so forth. But there's an area of influence, an area wherein we have total control. And it's an area which requires focus. So going back to what was mentioned originally, there are three areas that we can focus on. The first is the schools, the schooling system. And of course, there are certain influences within a schooling system which will affect our children. The most obvious one being the curriculum which is being taught. And yes, there will be in schools curriculums that are taught, ideas, concepts which are taught that go against some of the foundational principles that we have as Muslims and believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His framework sent to the final messenger, Muhammad alayhi salatu salam. Likewise, another influence within the schooling system is a child's peers, a child's friends. And this is something that a parent may have some say over, as we can look at who our children are befriending. We can get to know the parents of our children's friends. We can develop a community that stems from the school outside of the school. And this is very important not only for our children but for society to have a say in what happens outside of the educational area based upon our interaction with parents and children and so on and so forth. The second main area of influence is the masajid, the places of worship. The first, the schooling system. And it's difficult for us to have a say in most of what takes place within the schooling system. We can try our best, we can lobby, we can be active and so on and so forth, yes. But essentially they are going to learn that which will be contradictory to our core set of beliefs at some stage or another. And they will have to make decisions and choices based upon their own understanding, their own upbringing, etc. The second area, the masajid. And as we don't have any influence within the schooling system, generally speaking, we have to make sure we focus on the second and the third. The masajid, do we have influence over the masajid? Yes, we do. What type of influence do we have? We have individual influence. What type of a person am I when I come to the masjid? When young children come to the masjid, do I make them feel welcome? Do I scare them away? Do I make them feel like they're a burden for being here? And we have a collective influence, the management of masajid. And this, of course, perhaps there are some that are involved in management of masajid here with us today, but it's very important to take into consideration what facilities we have available to our children, to our youth. Is our mosque, our masajid, children-friendly spaces? As parents, do I bring my child to the masjid, to the mosque? Effort needs to be made. If I would like Islam to play a part in my child's life, I need to bring Islam into my child's life. If there are free activities, free courses, free lectures that are taking place within the masjid, what excuse do I have not to attend with my child? I need to put the effort into attending with my child. Bring my child to the masjid. Let my child hear what Islam is. Let my child understand what this masjid is, what the mosque is. It's not only a place of prayer, it's a place of learning. Show my child recitation of the Quran. Read Quran in front of my child in the masjid. Engage in dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in front of my child in the masjid. Make the masjid an active part of my child's life. And what will happen? The masjid will continue to play an active part in my child's life when my child becomes an adult. And the management of masajid needs to take this into consideration and make sure they have facilities available to children in the masjid. Make sure they have facilities available to our sisters in the masjid. Many masajid today, they don't even have spaces for women. And most of the time, it's women that will bring the children to the masjid in many cultures and within many communities. Perhaps here it might be different. Allah knows best. We would have to take a survey, which we're not going to do. So the masajid, they are a very important and crucial part to the upbringing of our children. If my child does not see me pray 5 times a day, if my child does not see me attend the masjid, then how can I expect my child to do the same when my child reaches an age wherein it's obligatory upon him to do so or her to do so? The third area of influence, and this is the most important for us as individuals and as a collective, the home. The schools, the masajid or the places of worship, and the home. And it's very easy to find the faults in others. It's very easy to point our fingers at the schools and point our fingers at the government and point our fingers at society. But we also need to point fingers, in fact many fingers, at ourselves and look at what's happening in the homes. For example, certain parenting techniques which are unacceptable, which take place within our homes. Physically hitting, beating children. Beating our children is not acceptable. It's not acceptable societally, of course, and firstly and foremostly, it's not acceptable within the framework of Islam. It's haram. It is haram to beat a child. Likewise, it's haram to beat a spouse. These things are unacceptable, and these things will have consequences on our children's dunya and akhirah. There are cases now wherein we are seeing problems with a child and their religion, their Islam, and you look at what's happening in the home, and the home provides the answers for the problem that we're trying to deal with. Physically abusing our children is unacceptable. A child does not need to be beaten to be disciplined. And usually, most of the time, When a person beats or physically harms their child, they're doing it out of frustration, which indicates the person has an emotional problem they need to deal with. The second, emotionally abusing our children is unacceptable. Emotional abuse of a child is unacceptable. Making a child feel unwanted, making a child feel unloved, making a child feel insecure. These things lead to problems in deen and dunya. And these things are far more common within our homes than we may believe. If someone here is beating their child, it's haram for you to do that. And if you carry on doing it, you're sinning. And you've been warned. It's been mentioned. You've heard it here, now, today, on the minbar. If you beat your child, it is haram. It is haram. It is a sin. And you are oppressing your child. If you emotionally abuse your child, it is a sin. It is haram. If you emotionally manipulate your child, it is a sin. It is haram. These things are unacceptable. And these things do not lead a child to love Islam. These things lead a child to run away from Islam. We have to understand this. It's very important. And we also need to try to learn and understand as a community, myself included, how to raise our children. We need to educate ourselves in raising our children. There is a difference between raising a child and sustaining a child, as has been said previously. Anyone can sustain a child's life by feeding the child and clothing the child and giving the child somewhere warm in times of cold and shelter from the rain and so on and so forth. But to raise a child, it requires investment, emotional investment, mental investment, financial investment. And if we are not able to do so, if we're not willing to do so, then we have to question why we're having children. It's a responsibility. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, we're going to be asked about our children. If we're sending our children to the wolves, we're going to be responsible for that. This is something that needs to be taken into consideration, as it's happening so often now. And we can have an amazing impact on our children's lives by simply investing time into our children, spending quality time with our children. If a man has a child, the man has no right to leave that child because he has a problem with that child's mother, or whether the problem is one that can be overcome or not overcome. A man has to fight to see his child with the means that he has necessary to him. If a woman has a child, likewise, she cannot just leave that child. And a woman has no right to prevent the father from seeing the child. This is oppression to the child. It's an oppressive act. And for some women, they may assume that they're hurting the man in doing this, but the reality is they're hurting the child more than they're hurting the man. A child needs both parents in the child's life. And we as a community need to pull our socks up, and we need to focus on our children rather than focusing on ourselves. If I have problems with my spouse, I need to either work those problems out or swallow my pride and suppress any reaction I may have to those problems for the sake of my children. That's the reality of the matter. That's how the elder generation dealt with things. And they got that right. It doesn't mean that I have to allow myself to be abused or put in harm's way. No, those issues, they need to be dealt with. They need to be brought to the authorities, to the masajid and so on and so forth. But we are breaking our marriages over petty and ridiculous and silly issues these days. And it's unacceptable because our children are going to suffer. The divorce rates within our community now are sky high. We're mistaking lust for love. We're mistaking fantastical romance for the reality of a marriage. And if we continue to do so, we are destroying the next generation. Our homes are our main place of influence in our children's lives. And so we need to make our homes a place of Iman, a place of love, a place of security, a place of direction, a place of nurturing. The fathers need to teach their young boys how to be men. The women need to teach their young daughters how to be women. That's our duty. And if we fail in that duty, then we can only blame ourselves with the calamities that follow. If we would like to change our situation, we need to focus on ourselves. That's the reality of the matter. And these issues that I'm mentioning, they are taking place within various communities within the Muslim community. These are not related to an ethnic people or a color or a tribe. They're happening within every home these days. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, high divorce rates, and so on and so forth. And it's unacceptable for us as believers, representatives of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Islam, to allow this to take place within our communities. The Prophet ﷺ, his final message was to treat women well. The Prophet ﷺ did not raise his hand once to a child in his entire life. That's our role model. That's our role model. And if we have issues, if someone is physically harming their child, then they need to seek out help for that. If they have emotional issues, they have anger management issues, they need to seek out help. And there's nothing wrong with seeking help. There's nothing wrong with trying to change ourselves. That's what a man does. A man rectifies himself when he finds a problem within. This is something that needs to be addressed within our communities, because it's starting to have a real impact. And we're going to see this further pop up the longer we allow it to linger. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وبعد. Sometimes the issue that we have is an issue of not understanding culture and not understanding context. There are certain parenting approaches and techniques that may have worked in previous times, and they may work in certain places, but here they do not work. And it's not to justify beating. Beating doesn't work anywhere, and it's unacceptable anywhere. But there are other parenting techniques that often may be used, and we assume that because they work in certain places, they'll work here. And that's not the case. In order to parent, we need to understand the context. We need to be involved in our children's lives. We need to educate ourselves. And the best thing that we can do if we want to change our situation, change the world, is focus on our children. Focus on the next generation. Raise a generation who do not suffer from the problems that we suffer from internally, so that they can focus on the problems that are external. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and forgive us from the evil of our own selves. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overlook our mistakes. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raise our children to be leaders, not only for us as Muslims, but for humankind. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us and accept from us, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us to that which is pleasing to Him. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Warda Allahumma an Abi Bakr wa an Umar wa an Uthman wa an Ali wa an sa'ir sahabati ajma'in. Allahumma tub alayna wa afu anna. Allahumma aslihna wa awladana ya Rabbil alameen wa aqim as-salah.